And Kiku is just sitting there, bleeding out in Nekomamushi's arms like, don't mind me, guys. For real though, this is a moment that she's been waiting for such a long time. She doesn't want to miss it. She's probably like, a mate, just hold me here for 5 minutes and then put me back to bed because my dude, my guy, I am in pain. Hello, humans of the world. I'm Dawn of the World. Welcome aboard. We have a lot to unpack this chapter, so let's get started on the Yamato and crew side of things. I have to say that I love that Yamato is already just subtly roasting everyone. I mean, you gotta get in there and start strong, I guess. Make a sturdy first impression so that everybody knows what to expect, and I respect that. But I do have questions. Like, for one thing, my biggest question is, will Luffy be accepting Yamato into the crew right away? I mean, this all seems a little bit too easy in some respects, and I don't think that Jinbei's comment here should be overlooked or forgotten. Oda including Jinbei in here saying that he needs confirmation from Luffy before he'll be convinced of Yamato's place in the crew is, I think, doing 3 things. Most obviously, it's showing us where Jinbei stands on the matter. But it is, I think, also Oda's way of acknowledging those of us who are kind of thinking the same thing as Jinbei, who might not be 100% convinced of Yamato's place in the crew just yet, and is also planting a seed of sorts to suggest that Yamato joining the crew isn't going to be quite as straightforward as it currently seems. Like, don't get me wrong, I've always thought that Yamato joining the crew would be cool and fun, but it's almost seemed too straightforward, if that makes sense. There's never been a right way or a wrong way that somebody can or can't join the crew, but I really feel like there needs to be a bit more to it than this. The most obvious thing people are going for is that Luffy is going to say that he wants Yamato to join the crew and not Oden. But at the same time, I personally think that Yamato channeling Oden from time to time is kind of a fun character quirk, provided it's not excessive. I don't doubt that Yamato will be sailing out of Wano with them. In fact, having her go to Elbaf with them, should that be the next destination, would tie in very nicely with a theory that I have about Kaido's and therefore Yamato's origins. But between now and then, I feel like there really needs to be a little bit more to it. Something that initiates a strong bond between Yamato, between the other members of the crew, not necessarily everyone, but just a few more people aside from Luffy. Just something to establish a bit more of a foundational relationship and rapport before we get thrown into the action of the next arc. Like, yes, Robin joined the crew having not really bonded with anyone, but that was also a lot earlier in the story, literally 20 years ago. And the crew is bigger now, we're much closer to the end game, and what worked back then doesn't necessarily work so well now. Regardless of the history she shared with Ace, we can't so easily have someone show up in the story's 11th hour, fight alongside Luffy for maybe 2 hours, and then immediately fit in with the pre-existing crew. Even if Yamato had been introduced earlier in the arc, prior to Act 3, and had been there for the build-up, it would feel a little bit more natural. Although her introduction in Act 3 was fantastic and I wouldn't change it. So on that note, isn't it a good thing that we have not only a Act 4 and Act 5 of Wano to come, but Act 3 isn't even finished yet? I don't think Oda has abandoned the 5-act kabuki format for Wano, and we shouldn't trick ourselves into thinking Wano will be wrapping up in the next 5 chapters. There are numerous stones left unturned, among other things. So with that in mind, this upcoming portion of the Wano arc could offer a brilliant opportunity for Yamato to establish these bonds with at least a few of the other Straw Hats. And from here, her induction into the crew will feel a lot more seamless. And I've got to say, I'm looking forward to seeing this dynamic. I want to see a friendship build between her and Jinbei. I feel like they could have this really fun sort of chill guy, chaotic guy dynamic. She can join the Unresolved Daddy Issues group with Usopp, Sanji, and Frankie, and she can bond with Zoro over how he looks like the samurai from... I just realized that that whole subplot with how the samurai that she bonded with back in the day have possibly become the numbers could be a thing. Like, it hasn't been resolved yet, so maybe that's something that can play out throughout Acts 4 and 5. The only thing though is that her face looks a touch too much like Nami's when it comes to the manga, particularly when we're not seeing their faces into great detail. Like in these panels here, for a moment I was confused and I thought that Nami was there twice. But this was only for a moment and I will quickly adapt. Yamato's face isn't as identical to Nami's as certain other characters are. They do have different eyebrows, they do have slightly different detailings in their irises, and faces aside, they're nearly a meter apart in height and one of them has horns. I will adapt. And stepping away from Yamato for the time being, it seems like Zoro still is alive in some capacity. He is laying there bandaged, and if he weren't breathing or if there was no pulse, then that likely would have been noticed by now. Also, I'm sad to say, but it seems like Usopp's legendary friendship with Hamlet has come to an end. But what is important at the end of the day is free will. Useful as he was during the battle, we would rather a Hamlet that is their enemy of his own free will than a Hamlet who's their friend but it's not his choice. I don't think I've ever talked about this, but that was the one thing that kind of bothered me about Tama's ability, that it would kind of overwrite their own free will and force them to be on whatever side that she was on. At the start of Wano, when it was only being used on actual animals, it was cute. But then throughout the battle, when it was being used on people who had eaten zone smiles, even though they were the enemy and it was turning the tides in our protagonist's favor, it felt a little bit dicey. One Piece is a series about freedom, so overriding somebody's free choice feels a little bit ugh. So it was great to find out in this chapter that that is not a lasting effect, that once the moon resets, the animals or smile users once again have their own free choice. They can go back to how they were, or maybe a new perspective will have caused them to change their ways, willingly. Also, Nami's expression here. I can't tell if she thinks it's sweet and she's thinking about her own childhood with an adoptive mother in some kind of way, or if she's thinking, that's a bit fucking weird. Or maybe she's jealous because she wants to be Tama's mother. It's interesting because Tama then hugs Nami later in the chapter instead of Speed. So like, what's the truth, Tama? Who's your mummy? Momo's speech was really moving and really good testament to the journey that he's gone throughout his series, his character arc. And this is such a monumental moment. It's been building up for 20 years for them, for 10 years for us. But my whole thing with this is, are they actually going ahead and letting Momo be shogun like right away? Like, I think he's going to be a fantastic ruler or anything. He has his people's best interests at heart. He's all that kind of stuff. He's also quite literally an 8-year-old boy in the body of an adult man who's been through a number of traumatic experiences recently. And the idea that they will sooner let this kid take charge rather than, I don't know, his 26-year-old sister who has seen the turmoil of the last 20 years on Wano unfold with her own eyes, who has lived it among the civilians, and who is very versed in the way the political landscape has played out. It feels a little patriarchal. Momo may have been born 28 years ago, but he has only lived 8 years. 8 years! That is crazy. I was reading Punk Hazard, his introduction, 10 years ago. It's like, I've known him for longer than he's been alive. In my real world mind, the best thing that can happen for him right now would be for Jewelry Bonnie to show up. Like, cool. You're gonna be a real looker when you're older, kid, but let's get your 8-year-old mind back into the suitable 8-year-old body so that you can grow up and have at least somewhat of a normal experience. Have Hiyori at least steward over Wano for 15 to 20 years, and then once Momo is an actual adult, then he could take over. Because being a little kid in an adult body alone has to be kind of messed up. And then having to rule an entire country after everything he's just been through on top of that, it just doesn't seem feasible to me. But neither did the nightmare that was Brachiosaurus, and yet here we are. Having said all that, having this scene in which he appears in front of everybody as an adult and gives this speech was still necessary. I loved this moment between him and Kinemon. You can see that Momo is trembling, but Kinemon encourages him to continue. Like, he's just this comforting and grounding presence. It's just really sweet, and I love it. It's amazing to think about how far they've come since Punk Hazard, and it's still so easy to think of the two of them as an actual father and son, as we did for all of those years. To be fair, they definitely have come to see each other as something of the like. And yes, I kind of still am of the camp that Kinemon should have died back there during the raid. I literally mourned him, but the fact is he didn't die, he's here right now, and this was a lovely moment. Also, while I probably initially envisioned something a little bit more elaborate for Momo and Hiyori's reunion, I still love these little panels here. And while I did just say a whole whole thing about Momo being 8 and Hiyori being 26, she's still his little sister, and she really felt like it here. Even if, in a lot of ways, she's technically also his big sister now. And while I also still stand by what I said about how Hiyori should be the one to lead Wano until Momo is an appropriate age, the final imagery of this chapter in conjunction with the narration is so satisfying, and I definitely felt something. This chapter was very much about family now I think about it. We've got the son of Kaido hanging out here on the Straw Hat front. We've got Tama verbally asking for adoption from Speed, and maybe subliminally asking for adoption from Nami. We've got Momo stepping up to take the place of his father, inheriting his father's will, while being encouraged by his father figure and reuniting with his sister. So what did you guys think of the chapter? Let me know. Feel free to click the like button. I don't know, I always forget to tell people to click the like button, but a lot of you still do it anyway. Thank you, thank you. I'm Dawn of the World, and I will see you next time. Bye guys.